Ladies and gentlemen, hello and welcome to the first episode of Let's Play Fantasy Hockey. Although I guess it's technically episode 0 still because this is a recap episode, but nonetheless, the first episode that I have ever done of Let's Play Fantasy Hockey. Now, before we get into things here, I just want to say real quick that I would suggest checking out the first video that I did make for this channel. It's 2 minutes long. It won't take up much time. The link will be at the top of the description where I just describe sort of why I created this channel, what I'm going to be doing with this series, and more. But in case you don't have the time to watch the 2-minute video, to give the too long didn't watch, essentially, this series is going to be me just going through week to week with my fantasy team and sharing how I am managing my roster, you know, looking into trades, looking at the waiver wire, and more. And of course, I'll also be talking about anything you guys might suggest in comments, whether that be specific teams, players, whatever it may be. I will happily discuss that with you guys, talk about it in videos, reach out to you guys in the comments, reply, and all of that. And I'm just excited to get into some more fantasy hockey here. In this recap video, I'm going to be going through my original draft at the start of this season, some drops and pickups I've made since then, trade that I've made, and yeah, just trying to kind of catch you guys up to speed, which brings me to my next point. You may be wondering, why the hell would I start this series a quarter of the way into the season and not at the beginning of the season? And my answer is simply that I didn't think of doing this until now. And I was going to just wait until next season, but we're only a quarter of the way through the 2021-22 fantasy season here. And that, I mean, it's still 10 months until the next season starts. So I figured that would be a bit of a waste. And who knows if I even, you know, want to get into it still by then. And I know I really want to get into it right now. So I figured I would just start it right now. Plus, I kind of really like the team that I have right now. So I wanted to share it a little bit and talk about how I got the team that I have right now. So before I get into how my draft went, who I drafted, and when I drafted everybody, I just felt like I should share the league details for the fantasy league that I'm in first. I'll be putting the details and everything in every episode from here on out, just in case people don't catch this one. The details will also be in the description if you kind of want to read into them a little bit further. I'm in a 12-team league. It's a categories head-to-head weekly league. The categories being first for the skaters, goals, assists, special team points, so power play and shorthanded points, and hits. Those are the only 4 categories we have for skaters. And then for goalies, we have 3 categories. They are shutouts, saves, and wins. And that is all weekly. Obviously, a lot more leagues do deeper stuff like shots, face-off wins, and a bunch of other stats. And with the league that we have, there's a lot of people that aren't like super into fantasy hockey. These are all people that we know in person. So we didn't want to include a lot of the more in-depth stats like that, especially because we've just recently gone into categories, whereas we always did points. So we wanted to sort of transition them into with more basic stats and stuff like that. And then with goalies, we wanted to do like goals against average, but you need minimum starts for that. And we just didn't want to confuse any of the people in our league with minimum start requirements or anything like that this year. So those are the 7 categories that we have. It's pretty basic, but it's still enjoyable for me. I forgot to add this in earlier when I was talking about the league, but I also felt like I should add in that our league does 9 forwards, 5 defensemen, 1 util spot, 4 bench spots, 3 goalie spots, and 1 IR plus spot. So those are all the spots that we have to fill on our rosters. I will say we unfortunately also are on ESPN and not Yahoo. I have actually yet to experience Yahoo Fantasy, and I hope to get into more than just one league next year, and hopefully one of those is a Yahoo league, because I really want to check it out and see what the Yahoo is like. So I think that tells you pretty much everything you have to know, and we can get into sort of how my team came to be and where my team is at right now. If there are any other questions, just let me know in the comments and I'll happily answer them, because I'm sure I'm missing some stuff, but this video is probably already going to be one of the longer videos that I ever upload, and I just want to keep it, you know, as concise as possible, although there's bound to be some rambling. All right, and with that, I think I've hit all my points that I had noted down to hit, and we can get into my draft and how that went. I'm actually kind of excited to go back through my draft here and share what previous Kyle's thoughts were at the time and kind of criticize myself for some of the picks that I made along the way. So out of 12, I ended up picking 9th overall. Fortunately, this is a snake draft league, so it was 9th and then 16th, which isn't too bad. But with the 9th overall selection in the first draft, I feel like I'm announcing a draft pick here. This it's not that serious. I picked Artemi Panarin, forward for the New York Rangers. I'm a big Rangers fan. They're my number one team. It's interesting. I'm from Canada, and people are always surprised when they learn that the New York Rangers are my number one team. We'll save that story for another day as to why that is the case, because as I said, I want to keep this video more concise because we have a lot to get through here. But aside from just being a big Rangers fan, obviously Artemi Panarin is one of the best forwards in the NHL. Last season, I believe he was third behind only McDavid and Draisaitl in points per game. So yeah, on top of being a big Rangers fan, Panarin is also just a beast. Next in the second round with pick number 16 overall, I selected Boston Bruins forward David Pasternak. Again, I mean, I think he went first round in a lot of leagues. I was really happy taking him with pick number 16 in the second round because, again, I feel like David Pasternak is kind of a similar player to Panarin, and they're both just amazing forwards. Something I will say going through this draft that I ended up doing, but it was not my intention from the get-go, was I punted both defensemen a little bit and goalies, which again was not my intention at all, and it sounds like a horrible strategy because I think the common thought is that there's more forward depth that you can get that are, better players later in the draft. However, I just felt like players kept falling to me and I had to make those choices. For example, my next pick, round 3 of the draft, 33rd overall, I selected Mitch Marner. Obviously, Toronto Maple Leafs forward, a star in the league, plays with Austin Matthews, just a absolute beast, like 100-point potential. Again, kind of another similar player to Pasternak and Panarin with Marner, someone who doesn't hit much, but just is an absolute force on offense. And I didn't even know that they used Marner for like penalty kill and stuff like that going into the season, so that's just another plus. So yeah, with my first 3 picks, I had Panarin, Pasternak, and Marner, who I all felt really, really good about. I think this video might end up being longer than I had hoped. With my next pick, round 4, I felt like he slid to me again. This was someone that I had hoped would slide to me in around round 4, because obviously there was the injury going into the season, and that was with my 40th overall pick, Pittsburgh Penguins forward Sidney Crosby. I mean, what is there to say about him? He's been one of the best players in the NHL for years and years now, and I couldn't pass up picking Sidney Crosby in the 4th round because that is a steal in my opinion. I'm going to start getting through these a little bit faster so I don't take all day here. But again, with round number 5, my 5th pick, it was another forward that I felt like I couldn't pass up at this position. And with number 57, it was Tampa Bay Lightning forward Braden Point. Obviously, he was supposed to be playing with Kucherov the whole season, and I thought he was just going to light it up. I still think he's going to be really good once he comes back. And once Kucherov comes back, but I did at the time, and I still do think it was a really, really good pick to get in round 5. Now, round 6 was where I finally picked my first defenseman with pick number 64 overall. I picked Florida Panthers defenseman Aaron Ekblad. I thought that it was a great pick. I think he's a fantastic defenseman. I'm still super glad I picked him. Obviously, he's one of the top defensemen in the NHL up to this point, and he's just been killing it. So no regrets at all of taking Aaron Ekblad as my first defenseman. However, Aaron Ekblad did end up being the only defenseman I picked in about the first 13 rounds. So stay tuned to find out what the hell happened with that. Now, each of these next 3 rounds I think were absolute steals. With round 7, my 81st overall pick, I selected Carolina Hurricanes forward Andrei Svechnikov. I believe he had a bit of a down year last year, which is why I guess he slid down a bit, but he's been great. He's like point per game so far this season on one of the best teams in the NHL, and I'm very glad that I picked him. Again, another forward next that I just couldn't pass up in round 8 with my 88th overall selection was Gabriel Landisgog, Colorado Avalanche forward. Again, one of the best teams in the NHL, one of the top power plays in the NHL. He hits. I couldn't pass up these 2 picks. So after these first 8 rounds, I figured that maybe it was time to look into goalies a little bit before I just absolutely screw myself. So in round number 9, pick 105 overall, I chose a goaltender that has been carrying me through the season so far. Turned out to be an absolute steal, and that is Jacob Markstrom of the Calgary Flames. He's ranked first of all goaltenders in my league for fantasy. And yeah, what can you say? I wish I could say I was a prophet and I knew he'd be this beast, but I honestly didn't. I didn't expect Calgary to be this damn good. I didn't expect Jacob Markstrom to get this many shutouts, this many wins, be so solid just all around. And that brings me to my next pick, who I actually figured would be my best goalie, and that has not been the case at all so far. In round 10, 112th overall, I selected goaltender of the Vancouver Canucks, Thatcher Demko. I expected going into the season Vancouver to be a very solid team. Obviously, that has not been the case at all. I do have hopes that they'll turn it around. I have not dropped Demko at all yet. I still think Demko's a really solid goalie. But up to this point, Markstrom has clear and away been much better than Demko. So back to back there, I kind of picked my 1 and 2 goaltenders. So I felt comfortable with not picking another one until much later on. So in the next round, which was round number 11, 129th pick overall, I selected Philadelphia Flyers forward Sean Couturier. Again, just a dude that gets a ton of ice time, has a ton of upside. He hasn't been fantastic so far this season, but I'm expecting him to turn it around and produce a little bit more as we progress through the season. Next, in round 12, 136th pick overall. Again, I'm a Rangers fan. I selected forward Ryan Strome, who plays on a line with Panarin, plays top power play. I think that he was a steal at this pick, and he's been really good so far this season. And that finally brings us to my second defenseman that I chose in round 13, pick 153 overall. It took 153 picks for me to get to my second defenseman. This was kind of a reach on my part. I think he went undrafted in a lot of leagues, but knowing that Dougie Hamilton was out and he was coming in, and again, I was a huge Ranger fan and I've watched him play for the Rangers. I know how good he can be offensively. I selected Carolina Hurricanes defenseman Tony DeAngelo. Obviously, I was banking heavy on him staying on the first power play unit, and thankfully that has happened so far, and he's been really damn good. And yeah, it was a fantastic pick, and it worked out so far, knock on wood. So I'm glad that I reached for him at that point. Next, round 14, 160th overall, I picked up Florida Panther forward Sam Bennett. Again, I thought going into the season that Florida Panthers would be one of the best teams in the NHL. Sam Bennett, since being acquired from Calgary, had been a beast for Florida, so I was kind of hoping that would continue, hoping he would stay on the first power play. So far, up to this point, that has happened, and Sam Bennett has been pretty damn good. He provides hits as well, so just really couldn't go wrong too much with that pick. Next, 15th round, pick number 177, I selected Rasmus Anderson of the Calgary Flames. He was the power play 1 defenseman, and at this point, honestly, there weren't a whole lot of power play 1 defensemen left on the board, so I kind of just grabbed him hoping that he would pop off on the power play. Next up, another player that I actually think was a little bit of a steal here at round 16, pick number 184 overall was Philip Forsberg, Nashville's Predator forward, and yeah, he's just a solid player, and I thought that was a good pick at that late in the draft. Next up was round 17, pick 201. Again, I was kind of grasping for straws at this point with defensemen, just going for whoever was left on top power play units, and the New York Islanders defenseman Noah Dobson was poised to be on the top power play to start the season, so I grabbed him here. That hasn't worked out too much, but I'll get into that a little bit later. Next up, with pick number 208 in the 18th round, I selected Columbus Blue Jackets forward Jacob Voracek. He's playing on a line with Patrick Laine, top power play with Patrick Laine. Obviously, the trade from Philadelphia, and Voracek has been a pretty good player for a long time now, so I expected him to pop off with Patrick Laine, and I thought it was a pretty good pick that late in the draft. Next up, another defenseman in round 19 with my 225th overall pick. I selected Keith Yandel of the Philadelphia Flyers, obviously coming in from Florida. He was a beast in Florida on the top power play. Unfortunately, that hasn't worked out like at all this season in Philadelphia. But I mean, you can't get fantastic choices with every single draft pick. That would just be ridiculous. Next up, I picked my third goaltender in the 20th round. pick 232 overall with Anaheim Ducks. John Gibson is who I selected as my third goaltender. So I had Markstrom, Demko, and Gibson, which honestly I thought was pretty solid going into the season. And then my last two picks in round 21 and 22 of the draft, round 21, I selected Tyler Johnson of the Chicago Blackhawks. He was on a line with Patrick Kane and DeBrincat going into the season, and also was on the top power play. So I kind of grabbed him just to hope that he would pop off and hope that he would, have a really strong season with Chicago. And then with my last pick overall in the draft, for some reason he wasn't even ranked for ESPN, so I was able to kind of steal him at the very end, was Tyler Toffoli of the Montreal Canadiens was my last choice. Obviously Montreal hasn't been fantastic this season, but I still do think that Tyler Toffoli as your last pick is pretty damn solid. Anyways, hopefully that didn't take up too much time. I don't know. This video is going to be long. I apologize. But moving on now from my draft selections into what has gone on in the past 2 months here. So I will start just by going over who I have dropped since the beginning of the season and who I replaced them with from the waiver wire as kind of a mainstay on my team. So of the players drafted, I have dropped, let's see here. I'm just looking at the draft list again. I haven't dropped a single player that I drafted in the first 14 rounds, which is very, very lucky. They've all been pretty damn solid so far going into this. I have dropped Rasmus Anderson, the Calgary Flames defenseman. He's currently on my roster again, but I think I'm going to be dropping him again soon. I have dropped Noah Dobson, the New York Islanders defenseman. I have dropped Keith Yandel. I think he's on like 18 games in a row without a point now or something insane. It's ridiculous. So Philadelphia is in a hell of a slump right now. I did drop Tyler Johnson, and I have dropped John Gibson. So I've dropped only 5 of my 22 drafted players, which is pretty solid, I think. And of those players I dropped, the only one that I kind of regret having dropped is John Gibson. But it's not something that I'm really kicking myself over. I originally dropped Noah Dobson for just some streamers because he wasn't producing until somebody in my league dropped Rasmus Ristolainen, so I claimed him off of waivers. He hasn't done a whole lot in terms of points, but I know that the potential for points is there, and he also produces a lot of hits, which my team was in need of because I was lacking a little bit in the hits department. And I'm actually only rostering 4 defensemen right now, which I'll get into a little bit later, but I did drop Keith Yandel for some random waiver wire pickups until somebody in my league, I don't know why or how this happened, but they dropped Timo Meier of the San Jose Sharks, who at the time had like 11 points in 8 games, but he had hit the COVID protocol and they just dropped him. And somehow with the 10th out of 12 waiver priority, I was able to pick him up. So I have Timo Meier now on my team. I also, in my only trade that I've done so far this year, was able to free up a couple of roster spots because I traded in what I thought was a buy low. And I still do think was a buy low. I traded Moritz Seider, who I had picked up from waivers at some point, Tyler Toffoli, and Jacob Voracek. I traded those 3 players to another fantasy manager for Dmitry Orlov, who I dropped immediately after doing the trade, and Elias Pettersson. So I essentially traded those 3 for Pettersson. I do still think that Pettersson is an elite level talent. I'm hoping that he can get back to that point. I'm hoping that Vancouver as a whole can improve, especially because I have Demko. And I'm not going to lie, part of the reason that played into it is because I like having players from the same team. So I was able to pair Demko with Pettersson because it makes hockey more enjoyable to watch for me. And that was honestly a big factor in why I did that trade. I definitely wouldn't say at this point that I've won that trade, but I don't regret doing that trade at all. Because as I said, it freed up 2 roster spots for me. So with those roster spots, I was able to snag Jack Eichel as soon as it was announced that he got traded to Vegas. So I'm stashing Jack Eichel right now in my IR slot, and it looks like he should be able to come back. He's skating already. So I'm hoping he can come back within the 3 months and be good to go for fantasy playoffs. And then I was also able to snag, when somebody dropped him off of waivers, Kevin Fiala, who was underperforming a little bit, but honestly, like, he has 5 points in his last 7 games. So if that's underperforming, that's fine by me. And he usually always picks it up at the end of the season. So I'm more than happy to roster Kevin Fiala until he picks it up. And then finally for skaters, I don't know how this happened, but this past week, I was again 10th out of 12 in waiver priority. Somebody dropped Ryan O'Reilly from the St. Louis Blues. I don't know how this happened, but I was able to claim him with my 10th waiver priority. So I also now roster Ryan O'Reilly. I honestly think my team is ridiculous, which has led to a little bit of a problem that I'll get into in a second here. But I also want to address, I did originally draft John Gibson. I dropped him for Ilya Sorokin. When he got injured earlier in the season, I was able to put John Gibson in my IR slot, and I picked up Ilya Sorokin in the meantime, who at that time had gotten, I believe, 4 shutouts in his past 5 games, or 3 shutouts in his past 5 games, 4 wins, or something like that. He was on an insane run, which was really unfortunate for me because the Islanders have just been a steaming pile of trash since then. So I dropped both Gibson and Ilya Sorokin like it's fucking hot. And I currently am rostering still Markstrom, Demko, and then I have James Reimer of the San Jose Sharks, who has actually been pretty damn good lately as my 3rd goaltender. And that catches you guys up with what has happened so far in my fantasy hockey season. So my team at the moment consists of, I'll start with forwards, Artemi Panarin, Mitch Marner, Sidney Crosby, Andrei Svechnikov, Gabriel Landisgog, Ryan Strome, Sam Bennett, Philip Forsberg, Ryan O'Reilly, David Pasternak, Braden Point, Sean Couturier, Elias Pettersson, or Elias, I'm not sure exactly, Timo Meier, Kevin Fiala, and Jack Eichel, who I have stashed on IR. Now, the problem comes from that exactly. I have 16 forwards, which means I only have 4 defensemen currently rostered out of the 5 that we can have rostered. And the problem is that I don't believe any of my 16 forwards are necessarily droppable. The most droppable one, I think, would be Kevin Fiala. But like I said, he always picks it up at the end of the season, and he might be someone that could end up winning you your playoffs. So I really don't want to drop Kevin Fiala. And I would be fine with rostering only 4 out of 5 defensemen. The only problem is that there's always going to be that empty slot. And on heavy nights, you're always going to be missing out on potentially an extra game, which is unfortunate. But I think it's something that I might just have to deal with, honestly. I've been trying to do some trades. I've been trying to sell high on Forsberg because he just had that 4-goal game. His shooting percentage is not sustainable at all. He's been a beast lately. I've been trying to package like Forsberg with Meier and stuff like that, trying to buy low on players like Mark Scheifele, even trying to swindle a trade for Darnell Nurse, who's injured right now. I've been trying to make trades in 2-for-1s that would free up a roster spot, but I just can't get it done. So I think I'm just going to have to take it week to week and try to make the most out of the position starts that I can get. You'll see in the next episode, which will be coming in the next day or 2, but I have looked ahead for the next week already and taken note, and I can make it work for this upcoming week because there aren't any nights that are super heavy, but I know in the future there is going to be nights where I miss out on games because I'm only rostering 4 out of 5 defensemen. The 4 defensemen that I am still rostering right now are Aaron Ekblad, Tony DeAngelo, Rasmus Ristolainen, again for the hits primarily, and Rasmus Anderson. However, I think this week I'm going to be taking that number down from 3 to 4, maybe. Which sounds ridiculous, but I don't know. What you'll have to watch the next video to figure out what the hell I'm talking about. And yeah, just still rocking with Markstrom, Demko, and James Reimer as my goalies. And I think I'm comfortable with those being my 3 goalies for now. Just going to continue praying that Vancouver picks it up here. Currently in our league, I am tied for 2nd with 5 wins, 1 loss, and 1 tie. However, I'm currently up 5-1 in this week's head-to-head. So I believe I'm going to become 6-1, 6 wins, 1 loss, 1 tie. And I'll still be tied for 2nd. And next week, I am battling it out with the person I'm tied with in 2nd. So one of us are going to take the lead there. And yeah, we'll have to see who reigns supreme. Again, stay tuned for updates on that. But again, I apologize for this video being so long. I had 2 months worth of fantasy content to catch you guys up on. I hope I was able to make this video like sub 25 minutes. If you did make it to the end, thank you so much. You're a legend. I would appreciate it so much if you could subscribe. and follow along the journey here. Let me know in the comments if there's any teams, any players, anything you want to talk about or hear me talk about. So yeah, like I said, in the next day or two, you guys will see what my weekly content will look like. Sort of just talking about my thoughts on my team, how it performed in the last week, who I think is doing well right now, who I think maybe is slumping, trades that I'm looking to do, and all sorts of other things. I hope that everybody's doing well. I hope that you're doing well in fantasy. I'll see you very shortly, and have a good one.